got you on.
Oh, do you?
I do.
Okay. I guess this doesn't end. Good afternoon. This meeting of the Subcommittee on Energy and Water Appropriations is called to order. Thank everyone for coming, members and guests, and today we are considering the fiscal year 2020 funding bill for energy and water development and related agencies. This bill makes critical investments toward combating climate change, strengthening our nation's energy and water infrastructure, and responsibly funding our nation's nuclear deterrent while providing the means to secure vulnerable nuclear material both at home and abroad. The bill rejects the President's drastic and short-sighted proposed cuts, including his proposal to decrease the Department of Energy by 12%, a 31% decrease to the Army Corps of Engineers, and a 28% decrease to the Bureau of Reclamation. Instead, our bill increases investments in these important programs. Investments at these agencies keep our nation at the forefront of global energy innovation, enable American companies to ship goods efficiently, and provides water, electricity, and irrigation to 31 million Americans and 10 million acres of valuable farmland. Literally, these programs sustain life on Earth and are the lifeblood for millions of our fellow citizens. Let me briefly walk through the bill. The MARC provides $7.4 billion for the Army Corps of Engineers, an increase of $357 million above fiscal 2019, and $2.5 billion above the budget request. It is a responsible proposal in view of what's happening across this country. In the Corps, the MARC provides significant additional funding for the investigations, construction, and operation and maintenance accounts, which supports more projects across the country and in our districts. The MARC provides $1.63 billion for the Bureau of Reclamation, an increase of $83 million from 2019 and $523 million above the budget request. The MARC provides $37.1 million for the Department of Energy, an increase of $1.4 billion from 2019 and $5.6 billion above the budget request. Within the Department of Energy itself, the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Program receives $2.65 billion, an increase of $273 million, about 12%, over 2019, and $2.3 billion above the request. This bill provides an increase for the Weatherization Assistance Program, which helps ensure that low-income households across this country have energy efficiency and more livable homes. The grid security programs receive a total of $350 million, an increase of $74 million over 2019 and $11 million above the request. ARPA-E receives $425 million, the first time it is funded at over $400 million, an increase of $59 million above 2019 and a rejection of the President's proposal to eliminate the program that invents the future. The Office of Science receives $6.87 billion, an increase of $285 million above 2019 and $1.3 billion above the request. The National Nuclear Security Administration receives $15.9 billion, an increase of $666 million above 2019, and within NNSA, the bill responsibly funds America's credible nuclear deterrent and existing weapons refurbishments while rejecting costly, poorly defined recommendations from the President's Nuclear Posture Review. Nuclear nonproliferation receives $2.1 billion, an increase of $145 million above 2019 and $82 million above the request. And finally, naval reactors receives $1.6 billion and reflects a scheduled reduction. Environmental cleanup receives a total of $7.2 billion, equal to 2019, and $706 million above the request to clean up our nation's nuclear legacy. Finally, as a surprise to no one, the bill prohibits funds to be used for a border wall and does not allow the President to bypass congressional intent to divert valuable core funding from previously approved appropriations. Whether we agree or disagree on the need for a wall or whether there is a crisis at the border, I hope this committee can agree that funds for a wall should not be taken from the Corps and its projects that protect communities across our country, some of which need our added attention. In short, this bill invests in energy innovation, promotes economic prosperity, and prepares our country to mitigate and adapt to climate change. ARPA-E, the Office of Science, and EERE are all critical to our country's economic independence and energy security because they invest in science infrastructure. They are our innovation pipeline and help prepare American industry so it can compete on what is actually a very unlevel global playing field. The bill will increase resilience and cybersecurity of the nation's electric grid, and it makes desperately needed investments in our nation's water infrastructure. It also promotes a credible nuclear deterrent while providing funds for nonproliferation. With that, I want to thank all our subcommittee members for their engagement during the hearing process, their magnificent attendance, and during the process of drafting this legislation. We appreciated all of their suggestions and all of the requests that we received from across the Congress itself. I also want to thank my ranking member, Mr. Simpson, for his true partnership. I am proud to have him as a ranking member, and I have learned so much from him. I will now turn to Mr. Simpson for any opening remarks.
Huh, no wires. Interesting. I was just looking through the pictures and stuff that are all very interesting, but I was trying to find the picture of Yucca Mountain, and there's not a picture of Yucca Mountain here. More on that later. Thank you, Chairwoman Kaptur. First, I'd like to congratulate you on presenting your first energy and water bill as chairwoman. I know what a big undertaking it is, and I commend you for it. Although our change in roles was not my preferred outcome, I have valued our continued friendship and partnership in leading this subcommittee. I'd also like to thank Ms. Loy and Ms. Granger of the full committee for their leadership and support of the important programs in this bill. It comes as no surprise that this year's bill will emphasize different priorities than in previous years. Within this prioritization, though, it is clear that the majority worked hard to address individual members' priorities from both sides of the aisle, and in fact, there are many good things in this bill. Of great importance to me, of course, is the Department of Energy's nuclear energy program. This office advances research and development to ensure a safe, efficient, and reliable nuclear fleet and to lay the foundation for the next generation of nuclear reactors. While I am disappointed that the account is kept essentially flat from last year, I appreciate the chairwoman's efforts to address many of my priorities within this account. I am hopeful that as this bill moves through the legislative process, we can work together toward a stronger overall funding level. The bill continues significant investment in our nation's water resources infrastructure, including harbor maintenance activities and critical water storage projects. The bill increases funding for basic science research within DOE's Office of Science, which is important to keep the national laboratories and America's researchers at the forefront of global scientific discovery. Unfortunately, the energy and water bill before us today does not reflect a bipartisan agreement on top-line funding levels. Before any appropriations can be enacted, we must come together in a bipartisan, bicameral fashion, working with the White House, to develop an agreement on overall spending caps. I think we all agree on that. I also have a few concerns about how this bill addresses or doesn't address certain federal responsibilities, namely national security and nuclear waste disposal. The Weapons Activities Program is $648 million below the budget request. We must uphold our nation's strong nuclear deterrence posture, and to do that, we must adequately fund the activities necessary to maintain a safe, reliable, and effective stockpile. Finally, the bill provides no funding to advance Yucca Mountain licensing application process. That's why I was looking for that picture. Continuing the licensing process is a necessary step in establishing a permanent repository for our nation's defense and commercial nuclear waste, as we heard from many members that testified on Members' Day about this. Yucca Mountain is the law of the land, and the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill should reflect that fact. Again, I'd like to thank Chairwoman Kaptur and the majority staff for their dedication and the hard work that have been done on this bill. My staff, Angie back here, and my personal staff, Sarah, who's around somewhere, for their hard work on this bill. I am hopeful that a deal on the budget framework to avoid sequestration next year will be reached, and that we will then be able to develop a final energy and water bill that reflects a balanced set of priorities. I thank you, and I thank you for your work on this bill.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Simpson, and let me express my sincerest thanks to all of our staff members who have labored early on in this quarter to get us to the table today. We're in the first queue of bills to come up, really. first half that are being moved to the floor by our very able chair, who I will call on next here, but I just want to thank Jamie Schimek and Matt Kaplan and all of the staff members of Energy and Water who've made this possible on both sides of the aisle. I will now recognize Chairwoman Lowy for her statement.
And I am very pleased to congratulate Chairwoman Capter and Ranking Member Simpson for the bill before us. And I do want to thank the staff who worked so hard and enable us to move this process forward. Thank you all. This week, we continue our work on an orderly appropriations process that gets the people's business done on time. House Democrats are fighting to give every American a better shot at a better life. Our bills break with the senseless austerity of recent years in favor of robust funding for initiatives that truly make a difference in the lives of working families. With increased investments through this committee, we can rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, protect our environment, and foster safe communities. This year's Energy and Water Development Bill accomplishes this goal by investing $46.6 billion to address climate change, improve infrastructure, and strengthen national security, an increase of $1.8 billion above the fiscal year 2019 enacted level. We must invest robustly to bring American infrastructure into the 21st century. That is why this bill increases funding levels for the Army Corps of Engineers construction account to advance construction on key projects and help address the Corps backlog. Robust increases are included for the Operation and Maintenance account, as well as the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, to ensure we are maintaining our nation's ports and harbors. The 6 new studies and 6 new construction projects for the Army Corps will fund flood control, it will fund navigation and ecosystem restoration. As we focus on modernizing infrastructure, we must also recognize that the impacts of climate change are accelerating the need to update and replace significant infrastructure. Rising sea levels and more frequent extreme weather events are increasing damage to our electric infrastructure and risk to ports and waterways. Acting on climate change is urgent, and this bill invests in research and development of renewable and sustainable energy sources. The bill provides $2.65 billion for energy efficiency and renewable energy to advance America's energy strategy, which will help achieve energy independence and manage threats caused by our changing climate. Given that the President's budget proposed to slash this important program by 86%, this bill represents a serious commitment by Democrats to ensure a clean energy future. The bill also includes $6.87 billion for the Office of Science and $425 million for ARPA-E to expand scientific understanding and secure our nation's leadership in energy innovation. Besides its domestic mission, the Department of Energy is also responsible for maintaining the safety, security, and effectiveness of the nation's nuclear deterrent and addressing the threat of nuclear proliferation and terrorism. The bill increases funds for defense nuclear nonproliferation by $145 million to help secure nuclear material. This bill will make our country safer and reestablish American leadership in a global clean energy economy. I urge my colleagues to support it, and I thank all who made this outstanding bill possible.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Lowy, and I know how busy you are taking time for all 12 subcommittees. Thank you so much for being with us this morning, and I say the same as I recognize our ranking member, Kay Granger, for her remarks.
Chairwoman Capter, I want to congratulate you for bringing forward the fiscal year 2020 Energy and Water Development and Related Agencies Appropriations Bill today. I also want to thank the ranking member, Mr. Simpson, for his leadership on the subcommittee. As a result of your work together, this bill addresses the priorities of members on both sides of the aisle and does many good things for the American people. I want to highlight some of those programs and also note a few areas of disagreement that I hope we can address as the bill moves forward. The bill continues to prioritize funding for our nation's water resources, infrastructure such as navigation, flood control, and water storage and delivery projects. Scientific research conducted at the nation's energy labs is well funded in the bill, as are programs focused on the security of our electricity grid. Unfortunately, I remain concerned about our path forward for the appropriations process. This bill is drafted using a top-line funding level that does not reflect bipartisan consensus, and we do not have a plan to avoid sequestration going into effect next year. Before individual bills can be enacted, we should have a bipartisan, bicameral agreement on overall spending caps. I hope the leadership in the House and the Senate will work with the White House to develop the budget framework quickly. I'm also concerned the bill does not sufficiently prioritize funding for critical issues. For example, funding for nuclear weapons activities is well below the budget requests. We must ensure our ability to deter a nuclear attack remains reliable and effective. Finally, I'm very disappointed the bill does not include any funding to advance the Yucca Mountain license application. We must stop ignoring the federal government's responsibility to develop a permanent site for nuclear waste. I'm committed to working with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to develop funding bills that meet our nation's priorities. In closing, I'd like to recognize the members of the subcommittee for their work on this bill. I'd also like to thank my staff, Angie Giancarlo, Sean Dillon, and Adrian Walker, as well as the majority staff. So thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Granger. As we've traditionally done, I would urge all members to consider holding any amendments they might have until full committee. But if there's further discussion on the bill by any member or anyone wish to offer an amendment, the chair will recognize you. Congresswoman Franco.
I do want to just make a comment. That's okay. First, I want to thank the members and the staff. I didn't know if we were, it was a hint.
That way
No-
they can hear you.
No mics. All right, let me just thank the members and the staff that all participated in this. And I want to make a comment in regards to Florida. I know this is a national bill, and so a lot of my comments will pertain to similar areas. But what I want to thank you for money for beach restoration and dredging, very important to our economies. As had beaches are not just about sunburns. We get a lot of tourism and also shore protection, the dredging, the waterways, commerce, the water commerce is very important, billions of dollars of economic activity. And I also thank you for the climate, for the energy efficiency research and so forth. Just go to Miami and you'll see it's underwater many days of the year just from climate change. And I think Debbie may mention about the new starts. I'm happy to see new starts. I know we've been trying to get money for Port Everglades for a lot of years. But the big issue I wanted to mention today was Everglades restoration, which I don't know how many people are aware, but the Everglades is the source of drinking water in Florida for over 8 million people and lots of visitors. And maybe about 20 years ago, there was a report that showed that there was serious degradation due to work that was done not maliciously, but to try to deal with hurricanes and so forth. The Army Corps and some state agencies completely messed up the flow of the water so that there was indications that we're going to completely lose our quality of life and a lot of our economy in South Florida. The federal government agreed with the state of Florida and entered into a plan called Everglades Restoration to mutually fund this project, which we have been doing, and which I want to say Florida this year put $360 million in its budget towards this project. Now, I know I want to say something else. This is very bipartisan. This is like one of the few things that our entire Florida delegation supports. We put in a request for $200 million in this year's budget. My understanding is, and I don't know whether this is correct, but my understanding is that One of the reasons we could not meet that is because the president's budget had a much lower amount. Since that time, this week, the president has now tweeted that he supports $200 million for Everglades restoration, which is what our bipartisan caucus had asked for. So my request is just this, is as this flows through, to try to take a look at that again so that maybe we can all be on the same page. And I yield back.
Is that a motion that we should always back the president's tweets?
Well, you know something, can I just say something? I so really agree with the president. I'm happy to say this is something, yeah, he can tweet about this all he wants. Yeah.
Thank you, Congresswoman
Yeah.
Frankel. Congressman Wasserman Schultz.
I'll be brief because I know the tradition in the subcommittee is that we don't speak and move things along, but it's important to, let me associate myself with Congresswoman Frankel's remarks about the Everglades. I am familiar with what the discussions have been and look forward to working with you to make sure that we can fulfill our commitment to moving the federal-state partnership that is the Everglades and that has been for many years forward, and providing that significant funding, which is now made easier by the president deciding to no longer offer and support a paltry amount of funding for Everglades restoration, and establish that we should provide $200 million, which is our fifth part of the 50-50 partnership. Also want to, there's a lot of other good things in the bill, but nearly all of Port Everglades, which is the largest cargo container port, certainly on the East Coast and one of the largest in the country, has significant responsibility, particularly for providing all of the fuel for the bottom half of Florida. And given that we're about to enter hurricane season, making sure that we have the ability to take those post-Panamax ships, complete the dredging project, will become far easier now because we have an additional new start in our bill, and appreciate that so much, and also the significant increase in funding in the construction account. But we'll have more to say during full committee. But to both the chairwoman and the ranking member, thank you so much. It really is a privilege to sit on this committee. We work on vitally important issues to our nation, and I appreciate your support. Yield back.
Thank you very much. Any other member wish to make a comment? All right, let me just say, in terms of the Everglades issue, we are very aware of the president's budget alteration, I suppose. We had the same thing happen in the Great Lakes, when the presidents have a very high learning curve. They need the Appropriations Committee. And we look forward to addressing that when we move to full committee.
Well, Madam Chairman, I would say that it's not the president's learning curve, it's more Mulvaney's learning curve.
President needs to think about that.
Yeah, he does. I agree.
All right. Having no further discussion, I now recognize Vice Chair of our committee, Visklowski, for a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that the bill be favorably reported to the full committee.
All those in favor of his motion, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay.
No.
The ayes have it, and the motion is approved. I would ask unanimous consent that the staff be permitted to make any technical and conforming changes to the measure just approved. Please make sure to return the materials in front of you to the subcommittee staff before you leave the room. And again, I thank you all. This is the most wonderful subcommittee. Everyone shows up. Thank you so very much. The committee stands adjourned.